In a world of intensifying weather extremes, aging infrastructure, and booming urban populations, the importance of water infrastructure is being redefined. Legacy systems that were designed in the past are no longer equipped to meet the challenges of the future. The evidence is all around us: climate pressure, resource strain, and rapidly changing demand. This is where infrastructure resilience becomes essential. However, we can't build resilience the way that we did in the past. Today, it means designing systems that can adapt to more extreme and unpredictable conditions, often with fewer professionals available, and we are no longer only serving long-standing customers. We are also balancing rising demand from new sectors, such as data centers and high-tech manufacturing. So how do we meet these needs while ensuring equitable access and restoring balance with nature? It begins with smarter decision-making and better use of data and technology across the entire life cycle. Emerging digital solutions are making that possible, from digital twins and AI to immersive simulations and powerful computing technologies. These technologies help us plan, design, and operate water systems with greater intelligence and foresight. However, resilience is not just about technology. It is also about rethinking how we manage water across people, places, and priorities. It is about integrating digital innovation into systems that support growing communities while protecting the environment. At Bentley's Year in Infrastructure 2025 conference, we are bringing together leaders from government, technology, consulting, and research to explore how we can rise to this challenge together.
Welcome, good afternoon to our water breakout session here at YI. This video reminds us again that we must act. We have to rethink how we manage water with greater intelligence and foresight. From climate pressure and resource constraints to rapidly changing demand, infrastructure resilience doesn't come easy. Here at Bentley's Year in Infrastructure 2025 conference, we're bringing together leaders from government, technology, consulting, and research to explore how new challenges and technologies are reshaping water infrastructure. And with this, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists. Nuno Medeiros, Head of Asset Management from EPAL, which is the water supply company of Lisbon.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Ben Townsend, Head of Infrastructure and Sustainability at Google. Welcome, Ben. Rod Naylor, Global Lead for Water at GHD. And Chloe Meyer, Senior Research Director from Bluefield Research. And the discussion today will be led by my colleague Cecilia Correa, who is our water industry strategist. Enjoy.
So thank you, Richard, and welcome everyone to our session about water. So thinking about the video that we have seen, I would like to start by talking a little bit about the future. So I will start with you, Chloe. And based on your Bluefield research, what are the most critical trends shaping the future of water infrastructure globally?
Thanks, Cecilia. So I think for me, one of the major trends right now, and that is shaping the industry moving forward, is the combination of a shortage of resources and the further or continued rise of digital solutions. And by shortage of resources, I mean several topics. First, there's the economic aspect. We know, of course, that assets, water, wastewater assets are aging. There is nothing new here, but the required investment are not matching up the levels that are needed to keep with those assets. And on top of this, a number of municipalities and utilities around the world are still experiencing increased operational costs, energy, for instance, but also general inflation that has impacted other costs from the OPEX group of expenditure, like chemicals, labor, of course. And on top of this economic shortage of resources, we have also a shortage in human resources. We all know about the silver tsunami. It's still happening. Qualified, experienced people within utilities are retiring, and it's becoming harder and harder for utilities to recruit new talents, but also retain them within the utilities. And I think those two combined means that sometimes there's also a shortage in technical capabilities within utilities. And we do see that increased or continued rise and growth in the as-a-service model, so the outsourced by utilities of various elements from metering to analytics to even the treatment of water to solution providers, because those are no longer viable for the utilities to do in-house. And I think that combination is obviously impacting utilities significantly, but at the same time, this is where some digital solutions prove useful and impactful, particularly around the optimization of processes and the optimization of certain operations like stormwater management, for instance. Optimize the retention capacity of systems so that we limit the number and intensity of overflow. So really, for me, the trend is that idea that utilities have to do more, to do better with less.
And I would add to that that when we think about the pressure, it's also a different pressure that we hear today when we think about IT and also nature, because before it was more about agriculture, water supply, and industries. And now we see a bigger pressure based on the different needs. So, Nuno, do these trends resonate with what you're seeing in Lisbon, for example?
Yes. Right. Well, first of all, I want to thank to Bentley to this invite, and secondly, just to know, Apple is the largest and the oldest water supply company in Lisbon. We have more than 157 years old, so I cannot be more agree with the trends that Chloe has just said, and another problem that we have about the resources and human resources is about the literacy, about the new technologies, the old and I'm just an old guy from a utility because I have already 30 years of Apple, but I know that they have some problems in the terms of the people to understand the new technology and how they can apply to the activities, how they can apply to improve the efficiency of the utilities, because we have a lot of talks of AI, we have a lot of talks of other technologies, other systems, but how they improve and how they applicate, how they put the technology inside their activities and their utility. It is quite difficult to our companies. Another problem that I think that we have is that water utilities are, it's not in Portuguese and in Portugal and in another countries, not a consolidated market. We have a lot of companies. Each municipality sometimes have a company. We divide the business in bulk and retail. And in the bulk, in Portugal, is just one company, it's Águas de Portugal, Water of Portugal. But in terms of retail, we have more or less 236 utilities. So it's quite difficult to improve the resources, to make a water culture mixed with the best of technology. And we saw in the video, Águas Report, it's not Águas, no, it's not Apple, but it's Águas Report. It is another great company of Portugal. And of course, we have, and Águas Report and us, we have a lot of technology. We started to improve that technology very early, but it was 20, 30 years ago. 20 years ago at Apple, we have already our SCADA. And after that, we implemented our SIG, our GIS, sorry, SIG in Portuguese, GIS system. And after that, not before that, we implemented CRM, our customer relationship management. We are one of the first companies in the world that implemented a real CRM for the retail business. But when we do that, and in 2010, we implemented an application called One Water Optimization of Efficiency at Working. It's about leakage, how to reduce leakage, how to monitorize the pipelines and distribution system. And we implement all that kind of programs, all that kind of silos, but we not integrated them. So in 2010, we can say that we are one of the biggest companies with good technology, but we forget to integrate them. And to integrate them, the people who put that systems working and relation the systems with the process, they are already gone off the company. And this is one of the definitely resources. It's one of the problems. Principle for public companies. EPAL is a public company. It's not a private one. In terms of private ones, and we have some concessions in Portugal, it's a little bit different from the public ones. So yes, I agree about the trends, and we have a lot of work to do at EPAL. We developed all these silos. After that, we developed a lot of labels with that silos. But the challenge for the future, we also use some Bentley tools, but now the challenge is to integrate all of that. And at the same time, we are applying more and more sensors in our network, more and more sensors in our dams, in our watersheds, in all our system. So we have more and more data, but we don't have the system integrated to can extract information from that data. And that's the one of the challenges. The second challenge is to integrate that, do it some information, and think about the information and automatize the use of the information with the EA.
And I think all of that impacts, of course, resilience, which is something that I would like to touch upon now, as this is often framed as a response to today's challenges. I would like to discuss how resilience is evolving as a proactive strategy for managing water in growing cities. So going now to the consultancy view, Rod, how are engineering firms like GHD helping clients embed resilience into long-term planning?
Thanks, Cecilia, for the chance to speak about that. From my perspective, I guess, in interpreting resilience and the way that we work with our customers and our clients and the communities that we serve, for me at least, resilience is all about uncertainty and managing the uncertainty that comes. Certainly, Chloe introduced one of the major uncertainties at the moment. If I dare to provide a collective term, scarcity. Obviously, there's a book going around at the moment describing approaches to that. But I think that scarcity that's growing in terms of resources and in terms of water resources and human resource and capability. And we heard that in this morning's keynote as well, a shortage of engineers to do the things that we need to do to respond. There's also a lot of resilience challenges around having more and too much of things as well, that we're not ready. We just heard the challenges of too much data. When you compound that scarcity with the challenges of climate change, when you consider social change at the moment, water utilities in particular serve communities. And as communities shift their social expectation, that makes dramatic shifts in the expectations on water utilities that translates to affordability and translates to regulatory change and turmoil in the industry, as we're seeing in the UK at the moment. Add population demand change, shifting demands from growing industry, which I think we'll hear about from soon. And resilience is an absolute necessity. I guess you can try and boil that down to some simple questions about what do we need to build and when. And the days of the illusion have passed when the answer was we'll build a dam, it'll last 100 years and we're resolved. We know that doesn't work anymore, not only because our city gets too big for the dam, but because the drought doesn't fill the dam or the flood overflows the dam. We get water quality issues, we need to upgrade treatment plants and deal with water quality risks. So the challenges are myriad and there is no straight solution. The approach that we take and that we're increasingly being better at applying and we're seeing a demand for is one of adaptive planning. So creating scenarios and alternative pathways and understanding the critical points for trigger points and investments that are necessary then to implement alternative strategies in line with what we see from these integrating changes, but also allowing us then to defer capital investment and commitment and try and reduce the engineering and the investment load necessary in the short term, and to make sure we make good choices, which gets to another point that Chloe raised, which is we need to be optimising the investment and optimising our response. The facing scarcities of labour, of capability, of financial capacity, making bad choices is just is damaging to our resilience. What we're seeing then, encouragingly, I guess, in the use of digital technology is that adaptive planning model being brought forward in time. So conventionally that was done on a 10-year planning cycle or even on a 5-year regulatory cycle. But increasingly we're seeing that be enabled once we've developed a plan, the monitoring and tracking in response to that plan being brought forward through digital technologies. And rather than waiting years for decisions, being able to accelerate to months and even weeks in response to some of the events and to some of the stresses that are making being a water utility difficult and that are affecting the communities that we serve.
Thank you. So Ben, from your perspective, how does resilience factor into the way large-scale digital infrastructures interact with water systems?
Sure. So I guess as I provide responses to this or other questions that will come up, I sort of want to bucket the relationship that Google has with watersheds and infrastructure in sort of 3 different buckets. One is that of a global industrial water user. The second would be a company that has very bold water stewardship commitments around replenishment. Mm-hmm. And then the third would be a company that can provide AI-oriented solutions to help assist with utility infrastructure planning, water resource management, and optimization. I think the question that you asked specifically, I think is best approached really talking about data centers and how they use water and the criticality of those resources. Historically, Google has leveraged evaporative cooling of data centers because it enables us to reduce our energy consumption by around 10% on average, but as much as 40% on a peak day. That is an enormous amount of carbon emissions that can be managed if you harness the power of responsibly, and that word is very important, responsibly sourced water to manage energy consumption and carbon emissions. I mean, imagine 40 to 50% of that energy load of global data centers, all that transmission and generation that's built really to manage cooling loads that only show up 5 or 6 days a year. Horrible investment, horrible scope 3 carbon emissions footprint that really provides very little benefit. I, as a civil engineer, have always, respected and honored the role that water can play in a responsible way, not just in agriculture and energy, but also in data centers. And as data centers continue to provide, critical tools that help run the economy, help keep us connected with friends and family, ensuring that data centers can stay operational 24/7, 365 is extremely important, especially when we think about inclement weather events or, unfortunate situations where we really need to contact our family or we really need to contact critical responders or understand how to get from point A to point B. Making sure that data centers continue to operate in those circumstances is extremely important. That being said, it's very common to have a data center complex that has anywhere from 5 to 10 billion. That's $5 to $10 billion of installed CapEx that is tied to water and wastewater utility systems that may be 20 to 30 years old. And as myself and the team have evaluated water resources and infrastructure systems literally all over the world, hundreds of water systems and public utilities, what we've often found is that the public utilities have not been given the tools or resources to truly understand the nature of their infrastructure systems or the watersheds themselves. We've entered communities where we've been offered water resources to help enable our carbon management mission and gone back to the community and said, you should not be offering this water to us, or actually anybody else for that matter. Our internal assessments suggest that your water resources are well oversubscribed. And what's a shame is that oftentimes we will refuse to use those water resources, and 6 months later we hear that somebody came in and scooped them up. And what it comes down to is just because we said no doesn't mean that somebody else came in with the resources to actually understand the status of watershed health or infrastructure. And so the point that I want to get to before handing it back is, what is different today besides all of the AI tools that can be used to assist and optimize the systems that you referenced, which I very much agree with. I also think that this is a unique period of time where across the world, data center owner and operators who are building billions of dollars of data centers are ready and willing to invest in sizable upgrades and improvements to public utilities in a way that public utilities have not been able to, rate base in the past. And if anything that I want to achieve in this talk, it would be finding ways that we can help frame these opportunities on how to strengthen the resilience of public utility systems and make sure that those are crystal clear asks to future data center developers, so that if they deserve to come into that community, they can become a major investor in a public utility system to the benefit of not just them, but everyone around them.
So I guess you touch upon the footprint, but also the handprint and how that connects to all the improvements that we're seeing also in the water sector. So Nuno, for example, are Portuguese water utilities regulating new type of water users and demands? I mean, have you seen this happening in Lisbon or elsewhere? Is this a growing concern?
Yes, we have two kind of regulators in Portugal. One more technical and economical, and another one is typically environmental, as an EFA. So we are regulating the reuse of water, but also we are regulating the use of water, of adequate water to each kind of industry. And that's not so easy as we think about it. But yes, we are thinking in that. And let me tell you two stories that you will understand clearly the way that we are doing in the last 20 years. I don't know if most of you remember the 1998 Expo in Lisbon. Yeah. All the gardens near Expo 1998 are irrigated with reused water in that time. Not water from the water supply system, not drinking water. It was underground water with no treatment, but monitorized. So we're talking about 1998. And nowadays, we at Lisbon we have a beautiful heritage monument that we call Águas Livres, Aqueduto das Águas Livres. It's a beautiful aqueduct built in the 18th century. And nowadays we are trying to use the springs of that aqueduct, that infrastructure, hydraulic infrastructure, bring water to the city of Lisbon. And nowadays we are trying to use that infrastructure to put new pipes inside and to use that spring water just for two uses: the irrigation of urban gardens and the cleaning of the city. So yes, we are trying to not to use drinking water, or just to use drinking water for the use of drinking, not the other ones. And we need to find another sources and another treatment. And reuse of water from the wastewater treatment plant, of course, is not use it. But in terms of hydrogen production, the challenges are quite different because they need a very quality water in the system. So we cannot use, they try to use drinking water, and we said, we as a utility, because EPAL is, we deliver water to 3.8 million people, 86 municipalities in bulk, not in retail. And when we have that kind of projects, we need to find solutions with the industrial and with the regulators and with the environmental regulator. So we are doing a great job with wineries, with the data center in the Sines that probably will be installed. It's an area of Lisbon. We are doing a lot of work with all industrial to find the better solution to water use in each industry. And we are doing a great job with them. Okay.
So, Chloe, how are utilities and municipality adapting to these emerging pressures? We have seen that in Lisbon, they are trying to regulate and trying to improve the way that they are supplying. So what other examples, or how do you see that they are adapting?
So I think wastewater reuse in general is getting a lot of traction. There's been a path set forward by innovative utilities in Asia, in the US, in Australia as well. And this is getting traction in other places around the world. And those utilities have really managed to create large-scale water cycles through reuse, which others can do. But I think the good thing and the idea to keep in mind is that not all wastewater reuse projects have to be huge from the beginning. And even a smaller project can have an immediate positive impact, including providing water for urban applications or industrial facilities, for instance, instead of potable water, for instance. And I think what we're seeing as well is, and maybe back to the data centers, is that there are more and more cities that are collaborating with data centers developers and vice versa. Community water investment is getting more and more common. It's also a way for data centers developers to generate that local approval that sometimes lacks at the beginning or at the announcement of projects. And what we are seeing as well is the development of those triangular projects where a data center developer supports that community investment at the level of a municipality or a utility, and collaborates as well with a technology provider, solution provider. And we see that particularly around leakage detection and non-revenue water. So it's a triangular model in which a solution provider would provide leakage detection technologies to help the municipality save water and improve its infrastructure, as it was mentioned. And it also benefits the data center developers because the water savings are then reported as part of the sustainability accounting and sustainability targets. So it's really a multifactorial beneficial model that, again, contributes to also alleviating some of those resources shortages that we've discussed at the beginning. Another aspect, back to wastewater reuse, it's still in some areas a big differentiator for data centers and AI developers in order to gain traction and approval for their project. Again, because it doesn't rely on drinking water or potable resources that may be scarce in some areas. And I think it really shows, generally speaking, that the concept of resilience is more and more critical in order to maintain operations and develop new operations without endangering, if I can say, the sustainability of water resources and future activities.
I think what you mean is that beyond consumption, we can do other type of partnerships, for example. So in the case of Google, then, what role can Google play in terms of shaping a blueprint for sustainable water use, like through innovation, partnerships, or even data sharing?
Sure, sure. I think sort of entry level, I wouldn't call it baby steps, but walking, not running, are some of the types of sustainability investments that we've made to date. So here in the Netherlands, we've invested in municipal leak detection and repair programs. We've invested in rainwater harvesting and capturing that rainwater through aquifer storage and recovery projects to help alleviate stress within the community. When it comes to data sharing, proud to say that we're the first major cloud provider to actually disclose how much water we use on a site level basis, which took a lot of work to get approved. I personally didn't think it was right to tell this story about how water can be used to manage energy consumption and carbon emissions, while at the same point in time refusing to tell communities how much water we were using, or not sharing with communities our insights about the status of watershed health. We're still one of the only major data center owner operators to do both of those things, and I'm not quite sure why. But I think we can't help each other and form partnerships if they're not built on a foundation of transparency, science, and trust. And all of this is in this sort of walking camp, but in a room full of people interested in infrastructure. I think if we really want to run, it's finding some way to collaboratively plan for the readiness of semiconductor manufacturing or data centers if communities are interested in these investments. And if they are, I think pre-positioning wastewater reclamation facilities and understanding as a community if a major investor was to come to my area and I'm interested in their project, what type of plan could I slide across the table to them and say, I'd love you to be here and create jobs and invest, but my community really needs a gray water project and we want you to be an off-taker of that project. And if you were going to build a data center, we would really want you to locate it here, because then you could export your waste heat and provide zero carbon heating to thousands of homes where distributed heat systems already exist. And we've done some of those projects. But I think what it comes down to is the transparency and trust and pre-positioning that allow thoughtful developers to partner with thoughtful communities so that we meet in the early stages of project ideation, so these types of solutions that really are best in class come together. Because if it's always just, we're going to give you whatever spare water capacity we have in the system and you're going to buy it, and then we'll figure out what happens after that, that's not thoughtful and progressive infrastructure planning. It's gotten us to where we are today with underfunded utility systems that are providing supply risk to both communities and industrial operators. So,
thanks for letting us know. Rod, is your firm involved in such projects, and can you share how successful collaboration with tech companies look like in your experience?
Yeah, I think so. We're certainly involved in data centers. I don't think anyone in the engineering game at the moment is not. Although part of my firm actually does data center design and engineering, and my water team have only just started to be involved with that group. So it's, I guess, a little indicative of the industry that we're just catching up on doing the water part better. I do want to tell two stories, I guess. One fast, one slow is my take on how we're collaborating. The water industry is slow. Things take decades. The data industry is not. Things are worn out long before the decade is over. And this mismatch, I think, is one of the challenges for that collaboration between water industry and technical tech companies. The planning cycle and the capital and asset delivery cycle is brutal. And as Ben pointed out, many utilities are underfunded, often don't have a clear view of the future, and don't have the finance, the funding, or the capacity to actually implement dramatic change. And what's a little bit taken the water utilities by surprise is some of the projections of how much water might be needed. But we get back then to the big challenge for utilities is the might. We're uncertain. Examples like Ben shared with co-location for waste heat recovery, development of rack design and cooling systems, uncertainty about investment or create diabolical uncertainty for water utilities trying to plan and plan an investment to meet the demand. So they're challenges that we're now helping utilities to try and map out and prepare for and structure their plans. In a lot of cases, I think water reuse is a great opportunity. Where I live in Sydney, unfortunately, we do have a very clear long-term plan for water security of the city, and it includes indirect and then direct potable reuse of that water. So while that water might be available in the short term, it's actually already committed to a long-term plan, and that means it's harder to get hold of. The other challenge that we find, and it depends on where you are, is that regulatory loop. So in some circumstances, it can be regulated directly. In other circumstances, water utilities under postage stamp regulation are obliged to meet requests for commercial demand. They've got immediate emergency works to be able to deliver a certain volume at a certain point, but that totally reshuffles their long-term planning and their capital investment portfolio. In some circumstances, 10 or even 20% of demand suddenly coming on within years rather than within decades, creates real challenges for the water utilities. And as I said, they're slow. It is really encouraging to see, and it's emerging, and thanks to Google for some of the commitments that have been made, and I know some other organisations around leakage water recovery as well. I think a solution requires the private sector to be involved, almost because of the latency and the slow momentum of the water utilities. They can't not be involved, but can they act quickly enough? A partnership, a triangular arrangement with the private sector, I see as a strong solution. Having come from the industry, I guess I look at that regulatory cycle where, and we often say in meetings like this, that water is a human right and that everyone's entitled to water. There's an alternative view that says we also should consider applying the water that we have to the most productive economic use and application, provided we're not compromising equity of people. And what I welcome with the evolution of the tech industry and data centres is an open conversation about the economic value and the economic contribution of water to our economies. So it's true that in many situations, cities are willing, are bidding for and are vying for the investment, the jobs and the economic growth and security that the technology business is bringing, with the implication then of having to address the water solutions. And I guess I look forward to some innovative solutions to that, some innovative partnerships and collaborations so that we can deliver both water security and equity and economic growth and security for the communities we serve.
So I guess you're really in the intersection between strategy and execution. You talked about some of the challenges, you talked about some of the solutions. So Chloe, are these strategies and these challenges that Rod just spoke about are aligned with what utilities are demanding?
Yes, of course. And I think it's a combination of forced demand, because utilities are looking for solutions to, again, sustain the water supply, sustain their ongoing operations. And it's also something that they want in-house to develop those more innovative approach to delivering projects, to financing projects. And I think to me it's also, in a way, the breaking of certain silos, and we know that utilities remain very siloed organizations, but there are also silos in between industries. And I think what we're hearing here is the breaking of those silos in between industries, in between the water utility, the wastewater utility, the industrial segment of the market, the domestic activities as well. We do see utilities in certain countries or certain regions that also collaborate with solution providers to deploy sensors within residence properties, which is not the realm of water or wastewater utilities. It's after the meter, so it's traditionally no longer their area of operations nor necessarily concern, but they do see value in gathering some insights into domestic consumption, and that feeds back into the utilities, the municipalities, water strategy planning in the long term. And it also something that feeds into specific programs that city can put together to offer, for instance, rebates on water saving home appliances, or even programs to fund the move from a sprinkler to a drip irrigation system. So a lot smaller projects or smaller scale projects in that instance, but that still, I think, exemplifies how there are those projects that are expanding beyond the initial scope of service area that is traditionally associated with water and wastewater utilities into new innovative ways to, again, increase that resilience and improve how those systems can deliver services for all their different customers, whether domestic, whether households, whether industrial as well.
And I would add the tech, right? We're in a technology conference, and I would say that the other part is the technology. And this, I hear you talking about challenges when we talk about multi-stakeholder projects. And of course, this involves, municipalities, as we say, the water utility, but also industrial, like also tech companies and utilities. So Ben, how do you navigate these partnerships from a tech side? Like you were talking about how to do partnerships with local authorities, utilities, etc. So how do you do this from your side?
Well, sort of across the three paths of entry, as I said, that of a global industrial water user versus a company that has committed hundreds of millions of dollars to water stewardship versus a company that can use their AI tools to drive positive outcomes in the water space. How we can consistently structure partnerships has actually been extremely challenging. As I was sort of sitting here thinking about the insights that you both shared around tools or innovative infrastructure, what it really comes down to is like, who's supposed to pay for this stuff? And what I'm going to say next, I don't know that my comms department would love it, but the reality is like, if you look at most public utilities in the water and wastewater space globally, they generally have two outstanding mandates. One is provide water for your citizens for as cheaply as possible and ensure that it doesn't poison them. And the second is make upgrades just in time to catch up with the prevailing water quality standards, both on drinking water and wastewater discharge. But on top of those mandates, they're also told, don't spend any extra money on fun stuff. Please don't innovate because we don't know who's supposed to cover this. It's all going to get rate-based, and you're really going above and beyond what your job is by innovating. So the question is, we can bring all these great tools to the table, but who's paying for it? And meanwhile, and I'm not trying to go doomsday here, but meanwhile, if you look at the EU as well as the US, well, we have agencies that are governing water quality, like the EPA or DG Environment. Yeah. We don't have central agencies who are tackling water value management. There are no central agencies whose job it is to track surface water and groundwater, tell us what the health is today and where the health is going. And so we continue to have this absence of meaningful insights that should be driving the business case for resiliency. And then we have utilities who are basically left with their hands tied behind their backs and can't take a long position on resilience because they're mandated from doing so and or they lack the fundamental data. And what I'm trying to find out, what my team is trying to find out, as a party that is part of a company that's willing to make very big investments in resilience, is how do we do it? Because we've approached public utilities and said, we've identified XYZ issue and we're willing to write a check for $150 million to go fix it. And they've said, we actually don't know how to receive that check.
I'll take it.
Yeah, so I think, the solutions and the bright minds are here, and while this is certainly a technology conference, I also want to sort of prime the pump, no pun intended, that we should also be brainstorming on what regulatory frameworks we need to reevaluate, what type of special rate structures might be created between public utilities and industrial users who are gathering an enormous amount of value from these water resources, right? I mean, in some cases, you are providing 5 million gallons to a steel mill who's turning around and turning that into hundreds of millions of dollars of profit. I think they want that resource to be resilient, and I also think they wouldn't mind paying a lot more to make sure it is, but the utilities have a hard time accepting it. And so I don't know that I exactly answered your question,
I think
but
you did answer with the question for Nuno to tell us a little bit, you know, how
I don't know if
would
I
a
will
partnership
answer your question or talking about more of this question.
I think he did focus on a lot of topics that, you know, we could stay the rest of the day here talking on its own. But, you know, from a perspective of utility, what would be, you know, a truly successful partnership? How can we navigate more with tech companies, for example, or others?
Let me just a little bit before governance. If you came to Portugal, if you are an industrial, all the projects, very important, we call PAP, the very important projects, industrial projects, are made by only one group, Águas de Portugal, Water of Portugal. Okay? Because it's our enterprise, it's the holding of EPAL that manage all the dams, all the watersheds in the country, and we govern the water sources with the regulators, of course, but it's our management. And we are closely, we are the arm of the government, of the environmental minister, to do this kind of, and to protect this kind of investments and to protect this kind of industry. So it's also a little bit of governance in each country. And we do it like that, okay? So if any industry comes to Portugal or came to a municipality and said, I want to put this industry, I have this consumption, how can you manage this kind of consumption? The first thing that they do is talking to us. And we go there. And we're talking to the guys and say, okay, and we're going to see how we're going to do it, how we're going to make the infrastructure, because it's an investment, it's a private investment, but so also it's a public one, because with the industry, we have employers, we have all the economy in that region, and in the interior part of the region of Portugal, it's a very desertic population in that area. So one of the things that it's most important in the utility sectors is to have a good governance and a good relationship between the government, the environmental minister, and the utilities. And we have it in Portugal. And we can kept a lot of investment in the food industry, in the beverage, in the all industries that are very consumption of water, but we manage it with the Heineken. It stay with the industry near the Tagus River, and they always talk with us, and we improve the better solutions for the industry and for us also. So we can manage that relationship. So to your question, the partnership. I think a good partnership has some rules. First of all, it's going to be win-to-win. Yeah. We must win both. And you need to be clearly what is the objective, what are the goals of the partnership. If it is an industry water utility partnership, if it is a technology solution provider or a consultant to provide, we have that partnership needs to be win-to-win partnership. You need to have goals, to have objectives, and to share what we are learning, to share what we are building, and to share the things that went wrong. That's the most important thing of all projects. To share what went wrong, because we learn it. We learn with the success more than with the success. Okay. So just to finish, one thing about the plans that Rod told. At EPAL, we are in this precise moment. We have one master plan to EPAL system and to another region, and we have made some plans for water and wastewater systems in little regions. But the driver of that plans is not to the investment, it's not to put things, it's to be flexible, to be monitorized. In each five years, need to change need to adequate to the climate, need to adequate to the new population. So we are doing all that kind of plans in our utility area.
Thank you very much, Nuno. I would like to continue. I had more questions for you, but we have to give some time to the audience to put some questions if they want. So I don't know if anyone in here has a question to any of our speakers. If someone can bring the microphone, please. Let's try to be short putting the question because we only have less than 10 minutes.
There it is.
Oh yeah, no, that's okay. I probably could have just talked loudly and asked my question. I was really, we've seen in the US recently some sort of high profile pushback by cities on data centers coming. So I was really interested in your comment about, as a city, you could come to sort of the table as a negotiator with the private sector and with technology companies like Google to say, we want gray wastewater, we want energy. The problem I'm seeing was sort of related to this industry to industry silo breaking down a little bit, whereas, data centers and water issues are local, but utilities are typically regional, and the players are maybe global, like Google. So I guess I'm wondering, practically, not theoretical, because we can talk about the economic value of water, but the economic value is we need it to live, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the fundamental discussion we should be having. So I guess I'm wondering, is there a really concrete way that any of you see we could use to maybe make some real progress? Because I feel like we talk a little bit at a high level, but we don't say, okay, we actually need to do this really specifically. Like your point, we want to share our problems, totally agree, but we need something more specific, I feel like, to bring to the table to those water utilities or cities or people who are actually grappling with these issues. I hope that's not a terrible question, but it's really what I want to know.
Having done this all over the world, the most actionable thing that I can reference is just like complete transparency. I mean, time and time again, we have entered communities where historically data center developers did not disclose their projected water use, not because they were ashamed of it. They didn't want to send a signal to other people who might be looking to build data centers that there was one of the critical success factors there. And I think what communities assumed, and I don't blame them, was that if somebody isn't talking about it, it's because there's bad behavior occurring. And we've seen industrial water use be done wrong for hundreds of years. It's a very personal issue, I think, probably to everybody in the room, so I don't blame them for feeling that way. The only way we were able to get around it was just going and speaking in person and saying, here's how much water we use. We're going to disclose it every year. Here's why we're using water. We have a commitment to 120% replenishment. We've done detailed hydrological assessments that unfortunately your community may or may not have had that shows the trajectory of the watershed. And if we are to enter here, we are going to do advanced projects like aquifer storage and recovery, or making sizable upgrades to your wastewater treatment facility so we can potentially use that effluent for cooling. And after we've had that transparent discussion, the community still really needs to take a hard look in the mirror and decide if the project is right for them or not. Unfortunately, like Google is just a sliver of the data center development space when much of the market is continuing to fly by night, not be transparent, and it's putting a black eye on the entire market, when what I think is an opportunity that we're missing is, for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, there is an industry willing to dump billions of dollars in utility water systems globally. And can we get communities comfortable with having actionable, transparent discussions that takes advantage of that growth to benefit community water systems? Or do we just want to say, water is scary, let's have all these data centers be air-cooled, then we don't have to have this icky discussion, and all these data centers will have significantly greater carbon emissions? And what I try to do in talks like this and ones I give elsewhere is like push other data center owner-operators to do the same thing. and then empower communities and utilities to be able to ask questions to folks who want to fly by night of like, why don't we just talk about this so we can co-develop the right solution and provide some examples of what that looks like.
I'd like to add a little bit if I could to that, and respond to some of your frustration, if that works for you.
Oh, please. I'm not the moderator, but yeah.
I think on the water industry side, it takes two to make an agreement or to get something right. The water industry is not ready and organised for this. The first thing I responded to in your question was when you said we were going to do this, water authorities beyond the minimum requirements are not clear on what this is. So it's really hard, and then they're not allowed or enabled because of regulation. What I think I'm seeing around the world is a bit of an evolution in the ambition and the maturity of the water industry, moving away from lowest cost minimum service through regulatory change in Australia, in the UK and other places. The US is quite varied, as I think someone on the last panel pointed out, my colleague from Consultant Hatch. But I think there's a shift towards understanding purpose. And when we advise customers, or I do, we need the industry to be better at understanding what I call the full value cycle of water, not just the asset or the asset life cycle, which I think goes to what Chloe was speaking to about understanding consumer demands and needs and understanding economic opportunity, and building the capacity for utilities to actually respond to that is a huge gap on the other side of that ledger, which would enable a better future that you're exposing.
And I think if utilities can like sort of blueprint out what their perfect system might look like that they can't afford today, but if they were to catch a big fish and that person was to come to the community, be ready to tell them you're only coming here if you build the perfect system for me, they probably will.
They've probably still got the chance. Yeah. The other point that I'd like to make as a saying that I often use is that water, despite global trends and global players and global impacts, water is hyper-local. There is no solution in one location that fits the next, so there always has to be this solutioning that's on a local basis. So that's a little bit of frustration for a global industry, but the local politics, the local community, the local social license is something we always have to address. And the reality of that is that it's hard, but worthy.
Okay, we have time for one more question, but very short, because we only have less than 3 minutes.
Great panel, thanks. Question for Ben. Sorry to direct everything towards you. You mentioned there about the sort of potential to invest into utility wastewater infrastructure. I think that's really interesting because a lot of like corporate water stewardship plays around quantity. So, okay, we use X amount of water. We're going to do this activity to generate more than that. Can you talk a bit about sort of where you see the role of corporates within corporate water stewardship to help improve water quality within the river basins where you operate? And sort of, there's been a bit of chat about water reuse as well. And I know Amazon's made some quite big plays on that in the US. Yeah. Can you maybe talk about the potential for that as well? Thanks.
Yes, and I will try to keep this to 2 minutes. I mean, really quickly, right, there's the hydrologic cycle, right? Earth is a fresh water producing machine, right? And that's driven by average temperatures. And the hotter it gets, the more ocean water evaporates into fresh water that's precipitated. More and more water every year. There are lots of locations where data centers, power plants, other consumptive water users are tapping into a surface and groundwater resource where Mother Nature is doing her job. Every year there's plenty of water replenishing, there's no shortfall. But from a communications perspective, the general community member wants to know, you're using my water, are you putting it back? And so we have these volumetric replenishment commitments. Meanwhile, there's places all over the world where it's like, I don't need to put it back, Mother Nature is, but what you really need is for somebody to solve the eutrophication problem because all of this agricultural runoff is poisoning your rivers and streams and lakes. Your kids can't swim in it. And it's making your public water utility spending a lot more money to treat that water to drinking water standards. And so that's the best use of the dollar. But it doesn't necessarily manage the communications and community acceptance aspect that comes with volumetric replenishment. And so we see people today investing in stream bank restoration and aquifer storage and recovery where not needed. Because if they were to invest in water quality projects, the community would say, well, you committed to volumetric replenishment in this area and you're not doing that. So it's, water's so nuanced, it's interconnected. We as Google, are starting to bias in a stronger way towards water quality projects as well, because we want to make sure we are relying on the best science we have to drive our behaviors, even if it's a hard story to tell.
Thank you very much. And we will end now. I feel that there was a lot more to say, so feel free to connect with our speakers and with our team. You know, and the rest of the YII will be here and happy to connect with all of you. So thanks again to our great panel and the discussion, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the YII. And please scan the QR code in the screen. I think it's there. Yes, to learn more about Bentley and our water solutions. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.